Hey, Everyday Conversation listeners. I'm excited today to have a guest with us, Leigh McElroy. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Perfect.
Awesome. So, Leigh McElroy is an author, speaker, and Bible teacher who teaches at conferences and retreats across the United States. She has created print and web content and curriculum for a variety of nonprofit and faith based organizations, including Redeemer City, Darkroom Faith with Houston's First Baptist Church. And that's what we're here to talk about today is Darkroom Faith. Leigh holds a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Texas A&M and a Master of Arts in Apologetics from Houston Baptist University. She's the creator of Wednesday Words, a weekly God in Real Life devotional, the author of 5 books, including The Beautiful Ache and The Sacred Ordinary, and co-author, collaborator, or editor for another 17 published titles. And I just want you listeners to know that I had to shorten down that list of things a little bit, but I wanted to give you an idea of who Leigh is and what she's been working on. Leigh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, John. I'm glad to be with you.
That's awesome. And so we are here to talk about a new curriculum that's been created for teens, I think maybe a little bit for young adults as well.
We're just saying
Tar-
Gen Z. So whatever
Gen
that means to
Z.
you, we're thinking high school, early 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, here's a little bit of an introduction of what darkroom faith is. Young adults are leaving the faith in droves, and unlike previous generations, they're not coming back. This new 14 episode original video series, Darkroom, a production of Project Savvy and Ox Creative, provides a safe and engaging context for teens to explore issues of faith before they turn away, never to return. Darkroom conveys to students that doubts and questions are a normal and healthy aspect of faith development. Viewers are encouraged to seek clarity when challenged, talk openly with trusted adults, and dig deeper into their faith. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Leigh?
That's perfect. I'm so glad you did that because it was much more coherent than I probably would have done off the cuff.
Well, um, I'll let everybody know. This morning, I watched a couple episodes of Darkroom, and first of all, I was very impressed. It's a high level of production quality. Here at Faith Beyond Belief, we're developing some curriculum, but I'm like, we're not on that level yet. You guys had, great actors, and it's very narrative based, it's story based, and it's based on real stories from the lives of teens and young adults. And so I think it's very relevant, and particularly for youth, I think they can connect with the stories that they're seeing. But the first question that I wanted to ask you is, what inspired the creation of Darkroom?
About 3.5 years ago, a friend of mine who I've known for probably 25 years, he's a retired business executive, very entrepreneurial, strong faith, married, 3 sons, all Gen Z age young men. And at our lunch, which involved lots of drawing of diagrams and lists on countless cocktail napkins, he explained to me the series that he envisioned to support young people in the church with the questions that they obviously have about matters of faith. And he did his homework, Randy Templeton, and he launched Savvy as a nonprofit, did about a year and a half of research and fundraising, and then started engaging uh, the best in the business that he could find in filmmaking, uh, content experts, engaging youth pastors, adults who care about kids, and really just building this thing from the ground up.
Yeah, that's actually answering a lot of questions that I was going to ask. But yeah, that's so awesome. Because I was wondering, I was like, there seems to be a lot of research behind this. Like you guys say in the videos, these are based on real stories. But I
They
can
are.
tell that there's been collaboration with both the target audience, researching from them, and the leadership that would be involved,
Yeah,
discipling Gen Z right now and all the challenges that come with that. Because I think,
correct.
when I look at something like this and having been in youth ministry and working with young adults myself, it's there's two sides. There's the discipling of the youth and young adults themselves, but there's a lot of leaders right now saying, I don't know how to answer these questions because nobody's asked me these questions before. We didn't talk about this when I was at Bible college or at university or
Right,
wherever it was.
right.
So this is very helpful, I think. Um,
Really, we had two audiences in mind, and that's exactly what you're talking about. We thought about the students themselves and focus grouped with countless young people who actually helped us identify the issues for the 14 films, and then talked with adults who work with those kids. And it's exactly what you said. They feel ill equipped and a little bit frightened about some of the questions that they know their kids are facing. So it really is geared to both.
I look at a topic, particularly a topic of gender. And I think for a lot of people who are older, and we have a lot of listeners who may be parents or grandparents, and there's a feeling that, well, I know what I'm think about this topic is correct, but I've really never had to explain it because I've never thought about explaining it before, um, to say something like a boy is a boy or a girl is a girl. I mean, it feels very like an oversimplification.
Yeah,
And a lot of people are thinking, well, why do I need to give more of an explanation for that or have a
yeah,
conversation about
yeah,
it?
yeah.
And I think our teens are in a totally different world, right?
They
Uh,
absolutely are. Yeah, and we can't call it the third rail anymore and just stay away from it. That's
mhm,
that's not going to work. It's not possible. So, they're asking questions like you say about not just about uh, you know, 25 years ago the talk was about premarital sex.
mhm,
That's not the talk anymore. The talk backs up way further than that. And it goes to issues, like you said, of gender. What is it to be a guy? What is it to be a girl? How is that even decided? How's that determined?
mhm.
Those things are up for grabs with this generation. So we just felt like we need to address the questions that they're really asking, not the questions we wish they were asking.
So, what are you hearing from Christian youth right now? Like, what are the big questions that they're asking?
Uh, you know, to use, there's one video, it's called Emma's Kind of Jealous is the name of the
I
video. I don't know if
I
this is
watched
one
that
that,
one this morning. Yeah.
okay. So you're familiar.
Yeah.
What's the deal with attraction? Look, this person I don't even know is DMing me and, saying, hey, want to hook up? I'll take care of you. I'll whatever. And the character is saying, gosh, that's weird. I kind of hate that, but it's sort of nice to be noticed. And
Mhm,
so there's this kind of struggle that goes on inside, even for a kid who has faith and is in church. They're getting hit with what everybody else is getting hit with, and they may be sitting in church with their mom and dad on Sunday, but they're just as susceptible to this kind of stuff as any other kid is. And so they're asking questions like, well, is it wrong to sext somebody? Is it, because that's not sex, really, is it? This is the kind of stuff that they're dealing with. And so to have the video introduce those things and raise the questions and to raise them in the voice of someone of that generation is what we felt like was really important with the videos.
Yeah, and that sort of leads me to another question because I was watching that episode. Of course, there was a lot of talk about technology and social media. Now, my generation, the millennials, we were all on MySpace back in the day, and God has blessed us by MySpace is no longer available. You can't go read all the ridiculous things that we posted and look at our photos. It's all lost to time,
Lucky
thankfully.
you.
That's right. But I look at for a lot of teens these days. I mean, they're way more online than we
Yeah,
were back then.
they
It's in their
are.
pockets and it's
They are.
everywhere. So,
Yeah.
how much is technology a part of this big conversation?
I think it's a big part, and not just in this one subject, and other subjects too, because they're online more hours a day than they're doing anything else, including sleeping.
Hmm.
So that's a lot of exposure. They're getting tons of content, but they're not getting a lot of help with filtering and
Hmm.
determining what's real, what's true, what's valid, what's not. So that's another way that we feel like Darkroom can come in and come alongside and ask some really pointed questions and then supply some food for conversation around the answers.
Did you guys find that being online or being on social media can be sort of a reality distortion field. Like one of the things that I notice is, because of the algorithm, it will show you all this content that is similar. And there's a feeling of, well, everybody thinks this, everybody believes this. I mean, I love this guy on a podcast the other day said, if Twitter was a reflection of reality, then Bernie Sanders would be the president. Because if you go on Twitter, of
Exactly.
course, there's a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters. And
Right.
so there's this feeling of, well, everybody must think this, right? But it's not actually a reflection of reality. And it's also curated to your news feed. Did you see that with teens? Like, do they understand that that's what they're seeing and that it's being sort of fabricated for them?
I think that's a subtle and very subliminal kind of trick. And no, I don't necessarily think they're aware of the algorithm and how one click feeds another click feeds another click. And it is, you're right, it is terribly reinforcing and not necessarily a reflection of reality. You're absolutely
Mhm.
right.
Um, what so that we talked about, what are you hearing from the youth and from the teens?
Mhm.
What are you hearing from the leadership right now? What are they asking for? What do you think they're looking for?
It's funny. It's almost the same thing, but just in reverse. If you're a mentor or a youth group leader or a parent, you've got tons of information at your fingertips too, but you don't have a lot of filtering help either. So, one of the things that we felt like was really important in the curriculum, and that's been the biggest part of what I've been doing with Darkroom, is pulling together resources from various trusted sources and putting them into one guide that goes with each video and saying, first of all, these are the questions the video raised. Here are some things around that are true that you could talk about. Here are some scriptures that are related to this subject. Here are some other resources, videos, um, books, articles that are also would help you to sort of beef up your knowledge on this subject. And then even an outline if you were going to take this into a Sunday school classroom or a Bible study classroom and do it in 45 minutes, how would you structure it? And so we offer kind of an outline of how you might do that. And what we're hearing from the youth directors and the adults that we've tested this with is just like a huge sigh of relief and thankfulness. We had one person contact us and say, these videos are fantastic, but I would download this for the curriculum alone. Just because everything's pulled together in one space. And if you need to do a quick get yourself on board, get yourself up to speed, then it helps. It's not the end all, but it helps.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. And I definitely sensed that when I was looking at the curriculum this morning and just feeling like, wow, there's a lot of good stuff here. And I think it's very poignant. It feels very relevant to what's going on right now. What advice would you give to those who are in positions of influence with teens right now, to Christians who are influencing, whether it's parents, grandparents, youth leaders? What advice would you give them?
This is probably going to sound too simple, but the first thing I would say is don't be afraid. Just
Hmm.
don't be afraid. I mean, culture can get really scary if you look
Yeah.
around you and you watch the news and you think about the young people that you love or your own children. That's kind of a fear-inducing thing. But I would say the truth is the truth. We have access to it. Um, and the questions, doubt isn't the opposite of faith. Doubt can sometimes be the way to faith.
Hmm.
And so if you're talking to a young person who has doubts about the veracity of the Bible, who has doubts about the resurrection, who has doubts that Jesus is the Son of God, or has doubts that there should be any moral restriction on his or her life whatsoever, that's don't be afraid. That's a
Hmm.
conversation. That's an open door. That's a way to keep talking. So I would say fear not.
Yeah. No, that's great. A question I would ask, sorry, that sort of stem from what you were saying there. What role, because I think when we hear the word deconstruction now,
Mhm.
it's sort of become a buzzword. Some people get really uh, fearful of it, saying, "Oh, this
Mhm.
student's deconstructing," you know. Um, but what role do you think that there is a space for legitimate deconstruction? For instance, I found that when I went to Bible college, my eyes were open to a lot of things that I thought were in the Bible that actually weren't.
Mm.
And really becoming more biblically faithful meant moving away from some of the things that I was taught in a Christian environment that simply weren't biblical or true. You know,
Mhm.
is there a space, or how do you think that sort of intersects with the more cultural deconstruction, which is moving away from Christianity?
Yeah, I think that's a scary word for adults and parents too, deconstruction. We have one of the videos on doubt is actually called My Deconversion, and it starts with a young man who clicked on something online and heard somebody's deconversion story and got really rattled by it, and
Hmm.
started thinking, well, I have questions too. Well, I'm not sure about this either. Am I, becoming an atheist or a person of no faith? Um, so yeah, a there's definitely, I think, a movement afoot about tearing down some of the absolutes of the faith that we hold. But as you said, there are also things that we grew up hearing in a Christian context that aren't necessarily biblical truth. And it's actually good and healthy, I think, to explore those things on your own and to look for the truth.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that 25 years ago, the dominant conversation around sex was the conversation about premarital sex and this sort of
Hmm.
message that don't, don't have sex till you're married. And as I reflect on on my childhood and hearing many of those messages, I now see that sometimes what people in the church were doing was they were taking the cultural depiction of sex fulfilling you and being sort of the end all be all, and putting a Christian spin on it. So
Hmm.
saying, how do we take this cultural value and rebrand it as Christian? So
Right.
wait till you get married, but then you're going to be totally fulfilled. And I think
Yeah.
many Christian millennials now feel like that was, obviously that's unbiblical, but also felt deceived by that
Yeah.
because they got married, and all the struggles and challenges that came with marriage, they realized that it wasn't the perfect paradise, and they didn't feel like they had been prepared for that.
Yeah.
So I think there is a little bit of deconstructing from some of those kind of things, where as we're going to the scripture, we're realizing, okay, well, God said that we were going to experience suffering, we were going to experience struggle,
Yeah.
and the culture tells us that sex is going to fulfill us. Christians shouldn't be telling people that sex is going to, fulfill them as the
Right.
end all and be all. Have you guys dealt with some of that or experienced some of those kind of, I don't know, that process of what I would
Sure.
call
I
a
think
legitimate
in that
deconstruction?
particular episode, the episode uh, that deals with this, uh, what we come down to is not it's not uh, you have to be this way, you have to be chaste, you have to be uh, you know uh, oriented to the gender that you were. We don't even really hit that in that way. What we do is go back to the origin of sex, that it's not, like you said, the end all be all, that it's not equal to love in every case. And what I think what we want more than anything is we want to be loved. Well, if you make sex an idol, either by worshiping it or saying that, true love waits and my gosh, you better, that's sort of a form of idolatry as well, right? Because it's always in the forefront of your mind as the thing. And one of the characters in that particular episode, I think you said you watched it, she gets to the end and they say, um, there's more to love than sex. Ding, 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 ding.
Hmm.
And so hopefully that's the light that will begin to go on, because that's reality.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of the characters in the Darkroom episodes that I watched are struggling with this concept of identity. Who am I?
Hmm. Hmm.
And relational identity. And what impact do you think individuality and, America and Canada are pretty similar. America's
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more individual and independent. And I think for a lot of teens, they're becoming more and more of these little islands. We talk about them spending time online all the time. They're finding some community there, but maybe less community in real life. Parents and kids spending less time together. How much of an impact do you think that's having on this whole conversation?
I think it's huge. I think it's absolutely huge. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I mean, we've all read so many, all of us with Darkroom have read so many things in the last 3 years that sometimes that my brain just goes blank. But The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self is the name of the book, and it's by a guy named Carl Truman. And his premise at the beginning is, how did we get to the place where we're going? Can someone who's born a man really be a woman, and can someone who's born a woman really be a man? And he goes through 100 years basically of psychology, literature, the romantic poet. I mean, he shows you how we got to that cultural moment. But the thing that he keeps talking about is expressive individualism. Like, we are so focused on the individual and what you think is right for you and I think is right for me, and that's the ultimate, that's the end all. And so we're all in our little silos thinking, well, if I'm just true to myself, I'll be okay. But what happens when my truth runs headlong into your truth and there's no arbiter? Then we
Yeah.
have a mess.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's, yeah, no.
So
One of our,
it's a big problem. You're absolutely right. Yes.
yeah, one of our listeners, Tim, asked, in your experience, what questions did you find difficult to answer or respond to?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. There's an episode on science that deals with creation and evolution, and the challenge there is to not immediately think it's 100% binary. Like,
Mhm.
there's only one kind of belief around creation. Pick yours, 7 day, whatever. There's only one primary belief around evolution, and never the twain shall meet. And so that one was particularly challenging to me. I'm not trained in science. We all had to do a lot of reading and narrowing down to work on that one, but that was challenging for sure.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that one. And obviously a minefield to navigate, right?
Oh
On
my
both
goodness.
sides,
Yes. Yes.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, we had youth leaders reading along with us as we were drafting scripts, and some of them just said, "I that won't fly." We might have a scene in the video, and they'd go, "I can't use, yeah, I'd get fired if And so
Yeah. Well,
that's
that
a challenge
actually
too.
segues really nicely into our next listener question. Someone asked, "How often do you think legalism, hypocrisy, or stubborn traditions on the part of the parents or broader church community play a role in driving the teen away?"
I can't say that doesn't happen. I mean,
Yeah.
in all honesty, I can't say that doesn't happen. And I have to believe that at least in the majority of circumstances, that's that's not the intent. But I think this goes back to fear, what we were talking about earlier. I think there's a sense sometimes in church that we have to be protective of our kids, protective of the truth, protective of the particular beliefs of our denomination or our individual church, and we can't entertain those questions because they're too dangerous. So I think it goes back to fear. But yeah, there's some of that for sure.
Yeah, and this actually flows really nicely into the next question. I didn't really plan this, but what are some approaches to avoid when trying to help someone struggling with this?
To avoid. Wow. The first thing that comes to mind, John, is just to avoid shock at any question if possible,
Hmm.
because sometimes I think our immediate reactions can shut kids down.
Yeah.
Like if we get the vapors and faint away when we get a question that, maybe we haven't thought about before, well, that tends to shut conversation down. Um, I think the thing that on the other end, the thing that we can do to encourage that is just to keep the dialogue going, keep the
Hmm.
conversation going. And you know what? Sometimes it's okay to answer a question with a question.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Things are moving so fast that we often are shocked or surprised at certain questions.
Hmm.
Um, and I know for me, I have a really hard time with my face not communicating what I'm thinking. So often I'm
Everybody
always
does.
sort of putting my
Yeah.
hand in front of my face, thinking.
Yeah.
And I think you're right too, being able to ask really good questions in response, because I think oftentimes we want to respond with, here's the solid answer, and this is the
Right.
only thing you should think or say.
Yeah.
Um, when I think exploring how the person came to that conclusion or why
Yeah.
they're feeling that way or why they're struggling with that is so powerful. Um, it's interesting. I'll just really quick. I was just working on something yesterday talking about intelligent design and
Hmm.
how there's a growing number of scientists who are embracing intelligent design and
Hmm.
starting to ask really big questions, which is very exciting. But for those scientists who really do oppose intelligent design, the question was actually often around moral questions. So
Hmm.
if there is an intelligent designer, then why is there pain and suffering, and these kind of questions, right? If there
Hmm.
is a God, why do we have these problems in our world? And I thought that
Right.
was really interesting. It had sort of moved away from a scientific evidence-based question
To
to
a
these more,
issue of ethics or morality or, yeah,
yes. Um,
theology.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that we sometimes we're not catching that this person has moved into a different sphere of conversation, and we need to follow them there because the real questions that they're asking might be deeper than the surface questions that they're asking.
That's so good. And it's easy sometimes to, I mean, you're working in apologetics, so you understand this, but it's easy sometimes to get into the apologetics cage match mode. Like, I'm going to wrestle you to the mat until you believe my
Yeah.
answers are going to be better than yours until I pin you down and you must confess belief. And honestly, I just don't know if anybody comes to faith that way anymore.
Well, it's interesting because I noticed with your first two videos, I think when people hear the word apologetics, they think, a debate between an
Hmm.
atheist and a
Hmm.
Christian scientist. And, a lot of these
Right.
conversations, 95% of people are sitting there with a dictionary being like, what are these guys even talking about? I find
Yeah.
myself as well. And I found it interesting. Your second video was on topics of sexuality.
Hmm.
And we're finding that a lot in apologetics that we are sort of moving away from does God exist, creation versus evolution, all
Hmm.
these kind of things, and more towards social issues and topics of
Yeah.
sexuality and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting, right? Because it's sort of a new time. And I think you're right that teens are asking different questions.
It is, and we in Darkroom we do both. I mean, we do talk about the Bible and can we believe it's true. We do talk about the resurrection and is there proof for that. But we also talk about justice and meaning and things that are not you wouldn't necessarily think of as classic apologetics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Lee, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today. I want to invite all of our listeners to go and check out Dark Room. Now, just to be clear, the curriculum, is it free or the videos are free?
Yes to both of those.
Yeah, so this
You can
curriculum's
watch the
free.
videos on the website. To download the curriculum, you just need to put your email address in, but they're completely free.
Yeah, and I think it's really beneficial even for grandparents to maybe go on and watch some of these videos and just get a little bit of an insight into what's going on with your grandkids, what's
Yeah.
going on in the lives of these students. And I really like what you said, that, it's not about fear, so we know that it's a different world and it's a changing world, it's a fast changing world, especially with technology.
Yeah.
But we can still trust that God has a plan and that God's at work and that God's word is true. And I look around and I think it's really hopeful. I'll just maybe one thing, I don't know if you guys share this in any of your videos, but 36% of Gen Z um, in a 2019 poll indicated that they want to learn more about Christianity.
Oh, that's
36%
great.
of Gen Z who are not Christian. And so that's compared to baby boomers at 16%. So that's a much
Wow.
higher number of Gen Z who aren't Christians would like to learn about Christianity. But one of the number one way is that having a one-on-one conversation.
Mhm.
And so here at Faith Beyond Belief, we're trying to equip people for those one-on-one conversations, so that Christians are ready to ask the good questions, to provide good answers, and to really present truth with love, humility, gentleness, all that good stuff.
Here, here.
So, pardon?
Here, here.
Oh, great. Is there anything that you
Yeah.
wanted to add, Leigh? Anything that you wanted to plug?
Uh, I mean, just I would really encourage all age groups to look at Darkroom, and we're on social media. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram.
I was
So
I was gonna ask, is there a
yep,
TikTok that we can follow
yep.
you
At
guys? All
Darkroom Faith.
right.
At Darkroom Faith.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners. Faith Beyond Belief is a listener supported ministry. So if you'd like to partner with us, we would love to partner with you. And you can head to our website, faithbeyondbelief.ca, to learn more about that. Thank you, Leigh.
Thank you.